Hi, it's me. Hope you're okay. Okay. Third time. First time, it had. Second time, I wasn't even recording, so we'll start this again. There is no videos next week. I'm taking next week off. My mum's coming over, and I'm going to be exhausted. So there's not a chance I'm going to have the energy nor the time to do videos. If something urgent happens, I will do a live stream, but other than that, there'll be no videos next week. I'll be back the week after, but you'll get your 3 videos this week, no videos next week, and then the week after you'll get videos, okay? Because this is relating to crime and criminal justice system and a crime I am unfortunately very familiar with, I'm going to say this disclaimer that I say every time I do something that's relating to a criminal case, whether it's murder or this. Hi, my name's Simone. I have a degree in forensic science and criminology. I have studied this topic since I was at university, and it is unfortunately something that I know incredibly well. Not through personal experience, but through people I know having gone through this, and people I've researched, and I've covered some of those cases on this channel, some cases I haven't. Now, when this case first kicked off, which was last year, towards the end of last year, which was when the Surviving R. Kelly documentary kicked off, I didn't cover it, A, because everybody was covering it, and B, because I wanted to know what would happen on a criminal investigation side. Meaning, I wanted to know what the police were going to do. And as it turns out, quite a lot. Because towards the end of last week, there was a warrant written for the arrest of R. Kelly for 10 counts of sexual abuse. Aggravated sexual abuse to be exact, involving 4 victims, 3 of which were between the ages of 13 and 17. These crimes happened in Chicago, and the age of consent in Chicago is 17. Now, that's why none of the victims are 18. But like I said, we're going to get into it. The judge set his bond at $1 million, and which is basically $250,000 per victim. The R. Kelly needs to find $100,000 to be able to make bail, which he currently can't do. His lawyers are trying to do that, but they are struggling because even though R. Kelly is one of the biggest recording artists of my generation, and one of the biggest recording artists ever to exist, and one of the biggest African American recording artists to exist, he was mismanaged, he had bad contracts, and he doesn't have a lot of money. So the fact that he's trying to find $100,000 when he hasn't got $100,000, when he already owes more than $160,000 on what's it called? Child support payments. It's not looking good for him. So he was, even though he got his bail over the weekend, he can't post it, so he's still in prison, or rather jail. He entered a not guilty plea when he went to his bail hearing. So his attorney did say that they were sort of expecting a higher bail than they got, but that they are struggling to find the bail money. Attorney Michael Avenatti, who represents 2 of the alleged victims, has reportedly given a tape to prosecutors. It's a videotape of alleged sexual assault. It allegedly shows R. Kelly sexually assaulting a minor. Not very nice. Now, this sort of mirrors, but not quite, the first case that he had in 2008, when a videotape came out of him having sex with someone and then peeing on them, and everybody who saw the video was like, that's so and so, she's only, I think she was 13 at the time, but the person in question said, no, that's not me. And because, even though it looked like her, because there was no distinguishing marks like beauty marks or tattoos or anything like that, they couldn't say for certain it was her. But because she refused to say that it was her, they couldn't find him guilty. But there's also other information relating to that, which I'll get into in a minute. He was acquitted of that, and there is a miscommunication, I think, within the media, where they're saying that this case is basically a rehashing of the old case, which isn't possible due to double jeopardy laws. So, ignore that. The crimes have been charged, allegedly happened during his 2008 trial, and some of these, three of the victims were under the age of legal consent, and from the sounds of it, it wasn't just like, oh, it's underage sex, it was assault. I've not seen the video, and I don't really want to see the video, thank you very much. He's been told that should he make bail, he's not to make contact with anybody under the age of 18, especially girls, and that he has to turn his passport, which he has done. This all happened after the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, which exposed his repeated abuse of many women throughout the entirety of his career, including partners, including his people he'd worked with, the children of people he'd worked with, school kids where he'd go and visit them. A lot of it was abuse of power. If he's convicted, he is facing up to 70 years in prison. And I can tell you now that if they stupidly put him in general population, he will not last 5 minutes. A, because of who he is, and B, because of his crime type. There are two things in prison that they do not like, which is crimes against children and crimes against the elderly. Especially crimes against children. So, as you can imagine, Greenberg, which is R. Kelly's lawyer, states that the charge may be a criminal case, which is where the miscommunication is happening, because I think when he said that it's relating to an old case, they're thinking that it's relating to the original videotape, but it isn't, because it can't be, because he was acquitted of that, and for them to try him for that again, it's double jeopardy. So there are also claims that the singer rigged his 2008 trial with physical threats and intimidation. Avenatti claimed that we have discovered substantial evidence that he has certain enablers that engaged in systematic witness intimidation, evidence tampering, physical threats, and payments to witnesses, and that he is certain that his handlers threatened witnesses of physical violence and death, scared witnesses by having them and paid them off so that they would leave, tampering with and destroying evidence, that he bribed witnesses, and all this was done as a part to obstruct the course of justice. Now, I'm not sure if there is a statute of limitations on this and what it is, but if it's within statute of limitations, I can tell you now that if he gets convicted of that, if it's true and he gets convicted of it, that isn't going to help him in any way at all. And if the victim from the original videotape does actually come out and say, yes, I was only 13 and I didn't really want to be there, then that's just going to sink me even further. Granted, they probably won't be able to use her testimony in court, because A, because if they do, the defence would rip her apart, and B, because it would be prejudicial, so they won't be able to. But if she was to come out and say, yes, this is what's happened, then it would put more credence to the stories that have already come out. The stories that came out with the documentary were alarmingly similar, especially between people that have never met, people that have never seen each other, people that have never spoken to each other. They have extremely similar stories, and it's not like one can have access to the other one's stories when there's been no trial, there's been no evidence or evidence hearings or this, that and the other. We just don't know. Ivanati has also submitted a video to prosecutors which shows two separate scenes of two separate sexual assaults with somebody under the age of consent. And it's, from the sounds of it, it was sexual assault, not sexual activity. Now, I do have a quote with regards to that. Two different scenes shot in two separate days on this tape. I was disgusted by what I viewed. This video is disgusting. Also adding credence to a lot of this is the fact that he married Aaliyah, the singer who unfortunately died in a plane crash, because when they got married she was 15. And he actually knew this, he was aware of this, because he says, oh, I didn't know she was only 15. It's like, yeah, you did, because you, apparently, from what I've heard, somebody actually, he got one of his handlers to go and get papers that made out Aaliyah was 18 so that they could get married. And when the annulment with Aaliyah happened, there was an agreement included within the annulment that protected him from physical abuse charges. Because if they hadn't have put that in several years down the line, he could have been charged for that. Or if not straight after, because she was 15. She legally has no way of consenting to sex, let alone getting married. So, the age of consent in Chicago is 17. Which is where these cases happen. I do know some other areas are checking. I think we are over here, as we are with the Harvey Weinstein situation. And there's one huge difference between the US and the UK. In the US, almost everything except for first and second degree murder has statutes of limitations in America. In this country, anything that involves murder or anything that involves sex crimes doesn't. And especially anything that involves children. They have no statutes of limitations. The perfect example of this, and it's sort of on a similar level but not, we had an entertainer that was originally from Australia that was a children's entertainer. He did a program where he would create art and he would sing songs, and it turned out that during the 70s, 80s and 90s he would abuse kids, and that I think it was either the late 90s or the early 10s he was actually tried, convicted and imprisoned for it. I'm not sure, but I think he might have the sentence of at Her Majesty's leisure, which isn't a sentence just given out to everybody. It's generally only serial killers, child killers that it's given out to. And I think he got this. I think he got that because of the amount of victims there were. In Illinois, which is the state in which Chicago is, the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse is 10 years of the victim turning 18. So say the abuse happened when you're 13, you've got a 15-year gap where you can bring charges. Now, a lot of people think, but that's weird. It's like, well, no, because if the parents or guardians are the one abusing the child, when the child then gets out of the clutches of said guardians or parents, they can then bring those charges, which is happening more and more often. And then you have other instances where you identify that the assault took place, which is either through sexual dysfunction, sexual trauma, or recovered memories, where there is physical or mental trauma that affects you, and once that trauma is identified and treated, and it is a matter of medical records, that can then also set a ball rolling. So, these cases are severe. They're one of the most severe cases I've seen. The amount of people that are coming out about this guy is absolutely enormous. He would go to schools, he would go to hospitals, he would go to a lot of places where he knew he would be worshipped because of who he is. He knew he would be worshipped because of his celebrity status. He knew that anybody would throw themselves at him, regardless of how old they were. And especially those going through puberty where they don't fully understand what's going on. Their brains aren't fully developed enough for them to completely comprehend what's going on. So they cannot make sound judgments, hence why legally they are not allowed to give consent. This is something he should have known because he was a victim of sexual abuse as a child. I'm not saying that all victims of sexual abuse become abusers. Some do, but not all of them. If it was all of them, there'd be a hell of a lot of people. And it's like a couple of the people that I know that have been through abuse have ended up being some of the best mothers I've ever known. So, just because you're a victim doesn't mean you're going to be an offender, but in this case, that did happen, unfortunately. Which was also the case with Austin Jones, oddly enough. There were multiple victims, multiple videotapes, alarmingly similar stories, even just between his exes, and that detailed his abusive behaviour. And they'd say that when he'd go from one woman to another, that the previous woman would warn them, they wouldn't listen, then eventually they would figure it out. And it would happen, then they would bridge a gap. And I know there are some people saying, yeah, but up until just before this documentary came out, one of his exes would still go to events with him and things like that. And it's like, yeah, because she had to. She was doing it to protect her children. And then when it came time for the documentary, she sat down with the children and said, look, this is what happened. And then the children have said, you can't stand by and let it happen, Mum. You've got to say something. He also had an extremely unhealthy relationship with his mother. And I'm not just talking about, extremely close like me and my mum or or toxic or anything like that. When I said that it was weird, I mean talking about Bates Motel weird. So, yeah. So this guy is one of the worst people to ever don the moniker of a celebrity. There are people that have done really bad shit, and there are people that have done bad shit just for the sheer hell of doing bad shit. This instance is one of the worst instances I've seen. I think the only thing that would, in my mind, that would surpass that is the case we had over here of Jimmy Savile, which was another child entertainer that we had. That not only would he abuse people that would come and watch his shows, but he would go into hospital wings and he would victimise the children in the hospital wings because he knew they wouldn't speak out, and he knew the staff at the hospitals wouldn't speak out because the staff needed the money he would raise. And that when the police actually questioned him, he used his power and he used his connections to royalty to prevent that from happening. It all came out after he died, but they did try and investigate him before, but every time he just played the I know the Queen line, so it was like, yeah. But yeah, I have an American website here, which is child sexual abuse statistics. 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is the victim of child sexual abuse. And a study shows that 20% of adult females and 5 to 10% of adult males record childhood sexual assault or sexual abuse incidents. And the plain simple fact is, this guy had power. He had power like very few have. The only other case that I can think of that goes anywhere near this that is current, that's American, is probably the Harvey Weinstein case, which is very similar but with adults. Again, power play. Again, power trip. And a lot of people, because it's sexual abuse, they think it's to do with sex. It isn't, it's to do with power. The offender is asserting their power over the victim. They are telling the victim, I own you, I can do what I want with you, and you will do what I tell you to do. Or, well, you'll just have to, you know, I'll stop sending you money or anything like that. And it's that manipulation that they use to get away with this. Now, was that manipulation familiar to anybody? Does it relate back to a double video series I did earlier this year? Sounds very similar. I'm not saying Greg is, but I'm just saying that sometimes people's language and people's behaviour is not always indicative of a problem, but it is a red flag. Now, with R. Kelly, there's always been red flags. There's been multiple red flags, and by multiple I mean probably over 100 victims, if not more. There is probably victims that are too scared to speak out. There are probably victims that have been paid off, or they've signed legal agreements where they think that they can't speak out, because if they do, then his lawyers will sue them. The other problem is when it comes to a criminal act, DNR, no, an NDA, that's it. An NDA is non-enforceable, which is something everybody found out with the Harvey Weinstein case. If you sign an NDA because somebody abused you, and then you speak out up about that said abuse, they cannot come for you, because that is illegal. And them getting to get you to sign an NDA purely because they don't want you to speak out is also illegal and shouldn't happen in court, but it does, unfortunately. There are probably people in some areas that have allowed this abuse to go on. There are probably people that his handlers or his people have paid off to do things for him. But the fact is that these things are starting to come down, and it's taking a while. It's the walls are coming down, and it's not just happening in America, it's happening in this country as well. We are having it with politicians, we are having it with children's entertainers. We've had some of the biggest names in this country investigated for that type of things. Some have been cleared, some haven't. And unfortunately, wherever there's people in power, and I'm not just saying men, because it's not just men who offend like this, women do as well. Whenever you have an imbalance of power, which is pretty much any organisation, any company, anything, there is 9 times out of 10 an abuse of power. Within that corporation, within that company, within that organisation, because of the plain simple fact is people get power hungry and they get power drunk, and they find out, I have power over you so I can get you to do what I want. Well, I want you to do this, and then it starts off little and then builds, which is the way it always works. And then you get to the point where you're just blatant about it because you've been allowed to do it for donkey's years, like Harvey Weinstein, like R. Kelly. The plain simple fact is, R. Kelly's been recording himself for years. There are probably a hell of a lot more tapes than the 2 we know about. The one from 2008 and the one from now. The plain simple fact is, these cases are the only ones that were within statute of limitation, which makes me wonder how many victims there were that they can't convict him for because they're out of statute of limitations. Because some of these crimes going back to the 90s. It's over 20 years ago. His trial will be interesting to watch. I might cover the Michael Jackson situation another time, but that one isn't as cut and dry as this one, and I'll explain that in the video I'll do about that. I'm not doing that yet. What I will link is my video with regards to Francis Grad talking about rape accusations. I will link that up in the iCard, and I will also link my most recent video on Austin Jones, which is relevant to this because it's very much like the YouTube equivalent in a way. Him and a few others. So, that's it for this. Stay safe, be good, have fun. And I'll see you on Wednesday.